56. There had been a 4-year window in Zoe's life in which she didn't believe in monsters. It lasted from age 6, when her mother told her that the scary aliens she saw in a movie weren't real, until age 10, when she ran into a big, fat, mean girl named Bella. Bella was the class bully, and one time she cornered Zoe behind a bowling alley, apparently having picked her completely at random. She wound up sitting on Zoe's chest, her knees pinning her arms down, her bulk making it hard to breathe. As it got harder to breathe, Zoe started to panic, and as she panicked, Bella started to smile. It had been Zoe's first glimpse of that dark thing that lurks in people, the writhing worm in the soul that feeds on other people's pain and fear. Zoe's terror and helplessness were making this person happy to the point of euphoria. In later years, Zoe would say it was getting Bella high. That such a look could appear on a human face in that situation was an earth-shattering revelation to little Zoe, a lesson more profound than anything that she would learn in school that year. It was then that 4th grader Zoe Ash realized that, yep, monsters exist all right. Not Bella, but the thing inside Bella. Well, call it what you want. Dismiss it as an old evolutionary defect in the brain that gets a charge out of cruelty, whatever. But don't say that that monster isn't real. What Zoe saw behind Bella's eyes was very real and terrifying and utterly inhuman. It was a dark, mindless hunger to hurt that was only being kept in check by fear of some greater power, parents, teachers, cops, a bigger bully. Over time, Zoe Ash would see how this ugly, parasitic thing lurked behind everything and everyone, like the roaches in that greasy old public housing complex that came oozing out of the walls the moment the lights were off. The history books were, in fact, nothing more than a log of mankind's largely futile attempts to keep the monster in check. Zoe knew, even then, that if a person like Bella was ever to get so big and strong that nothing could touch them, so that they could just feed that monster unchecked, then that would be the end. Zoe would, of course, encounter the monster again and again over the years. She saw it in the eyes of Jezza as he leaned her over the oven. She saw it in the face of the soul collector on the train, even with his eyes hidden behind those dark goggles. She saw it in the hyena when he had come after her in her bedroom that first night. But what she saw in Molech's face was different. Over time, Zoe had found that most people know that they have the monster inside them, and decent people get scared when they feel it lurching to the surface, when they feel that quick rush of guilty pleasure after hitting a child or delivering a cruel insult to a spouse. They immediately drown it in shame, spending weeks doing good deeds to push that dark, writhing thing back down into the shadows. Others will invent some fiction to pretend they have the monster under control. Corrupt cops torturing suspects in back alleys and telling themselves they're doing it for justice, or guys getting drunk and breaking a girlfriend's jaw, then blaming the booze, desperately trying to ignore the fact that the pleasure of unleashing the monster is the main reason they drink in the first place. Medieval priests ripping the guts out of screaming teenage girls and pretending the burst of pleasure they felt in their loins was the spiritual reward for doing God's will. Everyone dressing up their cruelty as something else, rather than admit they are the monster's slave. But not Molech. Molech understood the monster and embraced it, saw the world through its eyes. 5 days ago, Zoe had thought that only a ridiculous man would adopt a comic book supervillain name like Molech for himself, but now it made perfect sense. There was no Chet Campbell left inside that well-muscled body. There was only the monster. There was only Molech. Molech didn't waste energy lying to itself about what it was. Molech knew what it wanted, and knew it could get it, and it would never, ever stop. 57. Zoe pried open her eyes and saw her wrists were now bound in front of her with barbed wire that was encrusted with dried blood from where it had bitten into the skin. She took a breath and felt a knife twist of pain, a splintered rib jabbing into her right lung. Her whole face was swollen, her head feeling like it was the size of a basketball. She couldn't breathe out of her nose. She was freezing, a cold wind on her cheeks and ears. She looked beyond her bound hands and saw she was moving, heading down a busy street with people on the sidewalk stopping and staring as she passed. She tried to sit up and winced as barbed wire bit into her neck. She craned her head around as far as she could and figured out that she had been tied to the hood of one of Molech's monster trucks, like an animal being hauled back from the hunt. Her shirt was wet, a crimson bib of blood that reached down to her belly. The truck was rolling downtown, and Zoe's head was too muddled to think about where they were going or what it might mean. Then she saw that several blocks down the street was an imposing alabaster Art Deco building, whose design Zoe thought had borrowed heavily from the headquarters in the old Justice League comics. Parked in front were at least 20 menacing armored vehicles, brandishing clusters of gun barrels. Black-clad armed guards crowded the spaces in between them, the men and women of the co-op in the best paramilitary gear money could buy, brandishing armor and guns designed for the battlefield. From the hood of the truck, Zoe imagined herself getting helplessly shredded in the crossfire that was about to occur, but if it meant that somehow, some way, they took out Molech in the process, then so be it. The truck she was bound to rolled to a stop right in the middle of an intersection, a few blocks away from the co-op building and its black perimeter of bristling weapons. A second and third truck rolled to a stop on either side, the one to the right with a covered object in its bed about the size and shape of a snowman. Two muscular, shirtless men emerged from the cab of that one, neither of them Molech as far as Zoe could tell, and whipped back the tarp. In the bed was a scaled-up version of the little fire hydrant gadget Molech had pulled out at the park, the one that had disabled every firearm within a few hundred yards. The doors on Zoe's truck clicked and creaked behind her, and Molech strode into view along with Scott, who was now holding a professional-looking camera. That seemed redundant considering there were dozens of bystanders shooting from the sidewalks, each willing to risk getting torn to pieces in a crossfire if it meant drawing huge blink numbers in the process. Not to mention the swarm of drones buzzing overhead like gnats on a summer day. But, Zoe figured, Molech was like any showman and wanted as much control of the production as possible. Molech looked euphoric, like a man released from a long, unjust prison sentence. He was bouncing on the balls of his feet and licking his lips. He scanned the crowds gathered along the sidewalk and soaked in their awe. He muttered to himself, "Poor bastards don't even know what they came to watch." He looked at Zoe and said, "You get a shovel and dig straight down. You know what you find?" She tried to say something, but just wound up triggering a gurgling coughing fit that sent bolts of pain flashing through her entire body. Molech said, "You find the end of the world. My daddy and I, we used to go digging for arrowheads in the field behind our house, and we'd find one, and he'd say, 'You know what this is? This is the remnants of an apocalypse. For the Indians, the white man was their judgment day, scorched all this clean, and built something better, same as the Black Death before that, over in Europe. Plague wiped out 200 million people, killed all them peasants living among the rats and filth. And you know what happened right after that? Little thing they call the Renaissance. That's how this always works, like a brush fire, cleaning out all that dead underbrush so new growth can come in." Zoe swallowed blood and said, "Chet, listen to me. This is your last chance to turn back. What you think is going to happen today won't." Molech smiled. "I know you're planning something, you and your entourage. I don't know what exactly, but I know you've been running around like worker ants these last couple days. My personal hope is that you've built yourself a superhero to take me on. Maybe we'll fight it out on top of a speeding train. I mean, what can make for a more awesome Raiden demo than two augmented dudes battling it out on camera?" Molech turned to Scott and said, "Let's do this, bitch." Molech positioned himself in front of the truck, Scott framing him up with the camera so the shot would have the bloodied Zoe in the background. Molech glanced up at the nearest building, where the skyline feed countdown was ticking off the final seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2. The countdown vanished, and was replaced by the feed from Scott's camera, stretching across every structure in downtown Tabula Rasa. Looming over everyone was the image of Molech, standing in front of the grill of his monster truck, with Zoe in the background, trying to breathe through the bloody foam bubbling out of her nostrils. Wow, I look like hell. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I, as all of you know by now, am Molech, And let me just kick off the festivities by bringing an end to the 1,000-year reign of the gun. Molech signaled to the men in the bed of the monster truck to his right. They punched some controls on the fire hydrant gadget. The machine hummed, whined, and spun up to power. Then there was a thrum and a pulse that Zoey swore sent a visible ripple through the air. Scott turned to point his camera at the co-op headquarters and the small army parked out front. Zoey couldn't see around Molech's shoulders and bulging lats, but she heard explosions and screams and the sound of bystanders running. She peered up at the skyline feed. The armored vehicles in front of the co-op HQ were now belching fire and plumes of black smoke, their stored ammunition erupting inside. Confused gunmen ducked away, clutching maimed hands. Molech and his men casually climbed into the monster trucks, and soon Zoey found herself rolling into hell. Roaring flames, men moaning in agony, acrid black smoke searing her eyes. She coughed and pain exploded across her chest with each spasm. The truck skidded to a stop, the momentum throwing Zoey painfully forward against her barbed restraints. Molech jumped out and strode up among what was left of the co-op guards, Scott filming him from behind. One of the guards drew a wicked-looking knife and threw himself at Molech. The guy was quick and skilled and showed no fear. Molech made a series of moves that were too fast to see, and tore the man in half. He then strode up to the nearest armored vehicle, a plume of black smoke pouring from its rear. Molech made a fist, and even from Zoey's vantage point, she could see the bright ripple of electricity arc across his stainless steel knuckles. He reared back and punched the tank. There was a massive crunch of rending metal and a thunderclap of energy, a blue flash bright enough to leave an afterimage in Zoey's eyes. The tank was instantly broken in two, the ragged halves spinning away as if the vehicle had been kicked by an invisible giant. 4 crew members were spilled across the pavement. Molech screamed and hooted and felt the rush of a man becoming a god. Then he put his wrists together, and there was a flash of lightning so bright that this time Zoey had to close her eyes completely. Then she heard screams and decided to just keep them closed. The terrible sounds continued for several minutes, but eventually a calm settled over the scene, leaving only the gasps and cries of bystanders. Zoey dared to look, and there was now just smoke and debris and black smears of ash scattered across the marble stairs leading up to the co-op's stately headquarters. At Molech's feet, she saw the top half of a skeleton. Molech kicked through the bones and found what appeared to be the lone survivor of the assault, struggling to get to his feet among the blackened limbs of his peers. An older guy with a crew cut. It was Blake, the CEO they'd met with in the strip club basement, in full combat gear, just like the rest. He'd gone out there himself, side by side with his men. Molech stood over him and said, "I gotta tell you, man, that was disappointing. I heard you had more than 100 guys working for you. I figured you'd circle everybody around your HQ, and I'd get to shred them all at once." Blake spat blood on the steps. "My only regret is I won't get to see how you go down. But as dumb as you are, I'd say you've got about a day." Molech smiled, then pulled out a little device that looked like a metal starfish, the little pointed arms flexing on their own. He rolled Blake over, stuck the device on his back, and the older man let out a piercing scream as it dug into him. Molech left him there, then strode over to the third monster truck and from the bed pulled an oversized device that looked to Zoey like a cartoon bazooka. He aimed it at the arched front entrance of the building, and once again waited for Scott to frame him up with the camera. Molech squeezed the trigger, firing a projectile that burst in midair a few short feet of the structure, ejecting a massive net of thin black lines that encircled the building. The net pulled itself tight over the walls and columns, and then tighter, until puffs of dust were spurting from hundreds of cracks. The net kept squeezing and squeezing, pillars and corners buckling under the strain. Then, all at once, the building imploded, sucking in on itself like a popped balloon, the netting pulling tighter and tighter until jagged hunks of stone, concrete, and glass were being crushed together into a solid mass. Soon all that remained was a massive sculpture of compacted rubble, bound together by the bundle of thin cables. It stood in the center of a now empty foundation, a few broken water lines spurting into the air. When the dust cleared, Zoey could see the wire had squeezed the hunks of concrete, marble, and steel into the shape of a 30-foot-tall hand with the middle finger extended. Molech then threw a cable around the finger and dragged Blake up the steps. He tied the cable around the writhing and screaming man and hoisted him up, so that he was dangling from the rubble that minutes earlier had been his headquarters. Molech then climbed the hand, past the dangling man, until he was standing atop the extended finger. Scott moved to the base of the hand with the camera, getting a low-angle shot that would silhouette Molech against the gray sky, to really capture the majesty of the scene. Molech glanced up at the nearest building, taking a moment to soak in his own magnificence as it was being broadcast across the tabula rasa skyline, and all around the world, via Blink. "I respect those who fight with honor, like my friend Blake here. The rest of you co-op foot soldiers around the city, you've got about 5 minutes until the device I attached to your boss slowly fries his internal organs. Come cut him down. I'm advancing to the next level. I'm about to do a little urban renewal. I think you're gonna like it." They piled into the trucks, and soon Zoey was moving again. Behind them, black trucks soon swarmed the middle finger monument that had been the co-op HQ, men spilling out to come to the aid of their boss. She faintly heard Molech say, "All right, let's go to Squattersville." 58. As a target, Zoey thought, Squattersville made no sense. It was a crumbling tower full of shivering poor people, and leveling it would prove nothing, considering the place looked like 2 guys with sledgehammers could do it over a weekend. But then again, the monster didn't think that way, did it? The bullies she had known didn't take on other bullies. They got high off easy wins. Zoey tried not to think about what an easy win would look like when the target was a rickety concrete box full of 2,000 men, women, and children. She heard the crackling of the tires rolling over broken glass and tried to look around. They were passing through the shadow of the mountain of debris that had been Livingston Tower just a few days earlier. All the buildings across the street had plywood and tarps where the lower windows used to be, each having taken a cannonade of debris from the collapsing skyscraper. Zoey had to admit it, her visit had been hard on tabula rasa. And then there was Squatterville, looming over them with its tendrils of smoke drifting into the cloudy December sky. In the wake of any slow-developing disaster that hits the news, a hurricane or a flood or a war, there's this infuriating thing that Zoey always heard people say about the victims. Why didn't those people just get out of there when they knew what was coming? Why are they so stubborn? Infuriating, of course, because of the blithe presumption that everyone actually has somewhere to go. If you're someone to whom even a cheap hotel is an unthinkable extravagance, and all of your friends already have extended families sleeping on their living room floor, all you can do is hunker down and hope the storm takes a last-second turn. You don't have a choice. That's what it's like being poor. Choices are something you sit around and dream about having, someday after you strike it rich. So Zoey was not surprised to see Squatterville still fully occupied, despite the fact that word of Molech's approach must have traveled across Blink in a microsecond. If they fled the building in a panic and somehow managed to avoid being cut down in the streets by whatever exotic weapon Molech pulled out next, where would they go? They were at the mercy of whoever happened to care enough to protect them, as always. From where she was, Zoey could see that parked in the weedy lot in front of the decomposing building was the Black League of Badass van. They had taken her up on her offer, or had come to dig up the imaginary pirate gold under the floor. Either way, this was not going to end well. Molech's convoy rolled to a stop, almost exactly in the same spot where Zoey had held her open-air meeting with Will Blackwater and the rest 5 days earlier. The first person Zoey saw standing on the open first floor was Lee, red mohawk and all. The other 5 members were fanned out on either side of him. Behind them was a crowd, residents of Squatterville having come downstairs to see what was happening, or rather to find out what was going to happen to them. Some of them had brought weapons, knives, lengths of pipe, but neither they nor their ragtag band of vigilante protectors held guns. What guns they had owned now presumably lay in pieces thanks to Molech's gadget. Zoey assumed there wasn't an intact firearm for several miles around. There were so many drones overhead that there was now a pervasive beehive buzz under everything. Occasionally, a couple of the tiny aircraft would collide and tumble out of the sky in pieces. Molech jumped out of the truck to go meet with Doc, intently watching something on a feed Doc was showing him. Black Scott stepped into view in front of Zoey, glancing at her briefly as if to absently make sure she was still attached to the hood. He messed with his camera. Zoey tried to clear her throat, swallowing blood in the process. She croaked, "This is stupid." "Shut up. Ain't nobody likes a noisy hood ornament." You're trying to prove these gadgets can take on armies. What does it prove if you murder 2,000 unarmed women and children? Actually, the customers we got lined up for this gear, they need to know it can do that very thing. They just got to be sold on the efficiency of the process. Now quiet down, I'm going to wire your whole face shut. Have you seen who lives there? These are your people. My people? Yeah. Talk to me about racism, millionaire white girl. Your daddy buying and selling bitches like livestock. Well, instead of making money off the filth of this city, we gonna clean it all out, fumigate all the insects, here and all over the world, scrape off the barnacles and get this ship sailing right. I'm pretty sure Molech's eyes were all insects, including you. What has he told you? That he's going to sell to the highest bidder and split the cash with you? Open your eyes. Oh, my eyes are wide open, and it ain't about selling right into the highest bidder, hood ornament. That's trailer park thinking right there. No, it's about deciding who gets rated and who doesn't. That's how we're going to shape the world. Molech approached, looking giddy. Scott said, Help, your hostage is playing mind games on me. Ha! She probably just wants to play a solo on your pork horn. To Zoey, he said, He's magnificent, isn't he? Look at him. You know, you people almost blew it. But while the whites were breeding masculinity out, you were also raising slaves and breeding masculinity into them, growing the best workers and warriors and point guards. So be thankful for slavery. It wound up preserving masculinity in the species. Isn't that right? Scott said, I just want to make it clear that the views expressed by Molech are not necessarily those of the rest of his organization. Molech told Scott he wanted a shot where he was standing in front of the crumbling building and its rows of frightened faces. Scott framed up the shot, and once more the feed spread itself across the skyline. Molech said, To the 120 million of you who have tuned in to watch the beginning of the end of the world, welcome. Before this next part happens, I want to warn you that if you have children in the room, well, keep them in the room, because they're about to learn something important about the world. Behind me is a building full of termites. Oh, they look like people, but don't be fooled. Everywhere they go, the structures start falling down around them. This was supposed to be luxury condominiums. Look at it now. Our whole civilization. It's just like this. It's like a microcosm of a world with too many damn termites in the walls. Well, I got something for that. Here, let me do a demonstration. Let's switch over to our friends back at the co-op. The skyline feed switched to the finger-shaped rubble of the former co-op HQ, now swarming with black-clad guards who probably wished they had working guns in their hands, surrounding their boss. Someone had gotten him down from the rubble, and they were huddling over the star-shaped device stuck to his back, trying to figure out how to remove it. Molech said, 3, 2, 1. A flash, and a crackle, and a spray of meat. When it was over, a crowd of skeletons crumbled to the steps of the co-op headquarters. Zoey squeezed her eyes shut. From all around her, screams. Except for Molech. Molech was laughing. Not an evil laugh. She didn't actually think people did that in real life. It was an honest, involuntary belly laugh. The way a toddler laughs when he sees a fat person fall down. Molech said, Fries the meat right off the bone, like ribs in a slow cooker, radius up to 50 yards. He held up his left hand, and once more, his mechanical fingers transformed and changed shape, clicking and whirring into something shaped vaguely like an egg beater. This has a range of 100. The crumbling building in front of them was slowly draining its tenants under the surrounding streets, some of them finally making a run for it. The rest just waited, knowing they had no hope of outrunning what Molech was about to do. Zoey spat blood and rasped, Don't! This won't prove anything! Don't do it! Molech smiled. He pointed his handgun at her. Scott came around with a camera to get them both in the shot. Molech said, Make you a deal. You can sacrifice yourself, and I'll let these people live. You willing to do that? You have my word. We're saying this is in front of the whole world here. Here's your chance to be a hero. 1 life for 2,000. Zoey said, You'll kill all of us either way. So, I take that as a no. How about this? I'll save all these people in exchange for your cat. Will you do that? Will you sacrifice a single cat to save these 2,000 lives? Half of them kids? I'm not playing your game. You know damned well what your choice would be. People like you make that choice every day. You don't care about these people any more than I do. The rest of these buildings downtown, they got armies standing guard. Them churches we're going to next, they've got 1,000 volunteers locking arms around them, turning themselves into human shields. Who did these people have? Nobody. But you know who owns this building? You. And the only protection you sent were half a dozen slapdicks in a van. Molich turned away from her and strode toward the League of Badass squad, the 6 of them now huddled with their backs together, weapons at the ready, crossbows and swords that Zoey doubted they even knew how to use. Molich waited for Scott to get all of them on camera, then said, "So, here's what's gonna happen. I'm gonna air-broil the flesh off everyone in front of me. So you guys standing there in your little costumes and toys, you can either die heroically, yet pointlessly, in the wake of the blast, or you can walk away and admit that you actually don't give a runny shit about these people, which is perfectly reasonable considering any of them would slit your throat for meth money if given half a chance. I'll give you 5 seconds to decide." 5. The lob didn't need 5 seconds. Lee screamed, "This isn't over, Molich!" Then grabbed a canister off his belt and threw it to the ground. It exploded into a cloud of red smoke, which actually didn't do much to obscure the sight of the 6 of them running frantically toward their van. By the time Molich reached the end of the countdown, the black van with the League of Badass logo airbrushed on the side was squealing out of the parking lot. And then it was just Molich, and the tower, and the masses trying to find cover in a building that barely even had walls. Zoey said, "Please, it's women and kids. Look at them. Please. Scott, tell him. This won't prove anything." Molich put his back to the building. Scott framed up the shot so that the panic inside would be visible behind him. Molich addressed Zoey and the world. "Women and children. That's what they say when the boat is sinking, right? Women and children first? I thought you people wanted equality. Well, if the men don't count, then nobody does. And don't give me that crap about saving the little children. Maggots turn into flies, and that's all I can see here. You got people who can't feed themselves and can't clothe themselves, can't shelter themselves without squatting like rats in a barn. In what sane species can this trash behind me be allowed to stink up the gene pool? So spare me, please. I'm looking at addicts and whores raising future addicts and whores. Enough. All you watching this, open your eyes and remember what you see here. This is what's coming. Everything you think you know about power is about to be out. What the fuck?" A drone shaped like a 3-foot-long taco crashed into Molich's face. 59. Molich grabbed the drone and smashed it on the pavement, sending a half-dozen hard-shell tacos scattering around his feet. He flung the wreckage aside, in time to be met by another taco drone, this one white and decorated with a logo bearing a cartoon chipotle pepper. Behind it were 3 drones bearing the logo of a purple and yellow bell. Molich swung and kicked and slaughtered Mexican food with every mighty blow, while a 250 extremely confused Blink users watched. And still they came. Every Mexican food delivery drone that happened to be in the air at that moment, the navigation systems hacked and commanded but to fly as fast as possible to the exact location where Molich was standing. This part had been Zoey's idea, and if it caused Molich to run over and crush her skull in a fit of rage, she wouldn't mind this being the last thing she saw. Molich took the drones out one by one, screaming incoherent commands to his utterly baffled henchmen, while he stood victorious over the shattered carcasses of 36 Mexican food-themed quadricopters, breathing heavily and trying to suppress his rage. His clenching mechanical fists were covered in brown and white streaks of refried beans and sour cream. He surveyed the wreckage and said, "What the hell was that?" Scott squinted at the smears of food on the pavement. "Did somebody order a bunch of Mexican?" "Get the camera back on me." Scott did, and Molich said, "All right, I don't know who pulled that little stunt, but I'm about to—" Molich's face abruptly vanished from the skyline feed. The video on the walls of the buildings downtown scrambled and pixelated and finally resolved into a new image. What appeared there was the face of a masked Andre Knox. Andre bellowed a comic book villain's evil laugh. "Fools, you have fallen for my diversion. I want to thank my junior partner Molich for setting the stage. That boy sure does love his tacos." The shot zoomed out to reveal Andre in full supervillain gear, the exact costume Molich was wearing, only with the blue highlights and codpiece done in red. In addition, Andre had added a rather flamboyant red domino mask and a large brimmed black hat with a red feather stuck into the headband. He was stroking a black cat. Molich gaped at the figure that towered over him from the skin of the nearest building. What the hell is happening? Andre's booming voice continued. As my assistant/underling Molich indicated, we are a terrorist organization. We call ourselves Fire and Ice, and Tabula Rasa, and then the world will feel the steam of our combined passion and fury. Molich looked at Scott, then at Zoey, then back up at the building. Scott was messing with the camera. They're blocking our feed. Gotta have a drone up there jamming the signal or something. As you now know, continued Andre, over the last few months we have built in secret a lair right in the heart of this city. The place from which I am broadcasting is invulnerable to assault from the ground and the air. As you have seen, armors will bounce off our walls like gerbils off a bulldozer. And now, behold! The view switched to an exterior aerial shot of the former Fire and Ice palaces, captured from a drone hovering over a street choked with traffic from fleeing citizens and transfixed rubberneckers. Simultaneously, the black tarps fell off each of the two towers like a pair of dresses on prom night, settling silently on the streets below. On each building, Molich had gotten his volcanic glass etchings, the images vividly outlined in glowing orange, as if cut from still hot magma. A.J. Skelnick's facade crews had done a fine job. It really did look like obsidian. The etchings, however, were not what Molich had described in the work order. That's because 12 hours earlier, a brand new rendering had been uploaded to the grinders that had been set to carve the relief into each tower's veneer. It was the one thing they were able to get Skelnick to agree to before Bud's network got him and his crew out of the state. On the tower that used to be the Ice Palace, there was now a detailed rendering of Andre, wearing his hat and mask. And only his hat and mask. Zoey had never seen the real Andre naked, and doubted she ever would, but the rendering of Andre on the building had been very, very generous when it came to how well endowed he was. On the Fire Palace across the street, instead of the huge rendering of his scowling face that Molich had ordered and paid for, there was another full-body nude. This one depicting Molich, wearing only his robot hands. Zoey had never seen Molich naked, and prayed she never would, but the rendering on the building had been very, very stingy when depicting Molich's genitalia. The blink algorithm, tracking the camera movement and zooms of thousands of onlookers, instantly decided the specific part of the facade was most worthy of notice. The expression on the real Molich's face would have been hilarious, Zoey thought, if she hadn't been seeing it on someone capable of effortlessly vaporizing everyone in the vicinity. He had the look of a chess player who at the same moment realized his king had been checkmated and that the beer he'd been drinking was actually piss. This had been phase 1 of the plan, a stage they had simply referred to as confusion, and if nothing else, Molich certainly did look confused. Zoey coughed and a spray of blood splattered across the metallic blue paint of the monster truck hood. She decided that she still didn't feel like her side was winning. Scott said, Is that the design you wanted, man? Molich didn't answer. He looked like he was going to have a rage stroke. Scott said, I like it. Kind of got a Greek statue vibe going. Molich made a sort of hissing growl, then stormed toward where Zoey was tied to the truck and grabbed her by the neck. Is that you? Is this your people doing this? How did he get inside the tower? Tell me. Zoey actually came up with something really clever to say, but her whole jaw was now swollen shut from her busted teeth, and everything was all sticky with coagulated blood in there. Her retort just came out a series of wet moans and grunts. He turned toward Scott and screamed, Get in the truck! We're going to the Fire Palace! Scott said, Man, think. Don't you get this is what they want you to do? I say we move on to the next target. Stick with the plan. Whatever little prank they're pulling back at the palace, that don't matter now. Think it through. What's more important? Taking over the whole world, or having a few 100 million people think you got a baby dick? Molich stopped and thought it over. 60. They rolled to a stop a block away from the Fire and Ice buildings. Zoey had slipped out of consciousness again at some point, but was awakened when the truck lurched to a stop and she felt the cold bite of the barbed wire digging into her wrists. Molich stepped out, and the crowd roared at the sight of him. He sneered up at the grossly unflattering depiction of his anatomy etched into the facade. After Zoey had floated the general idea of changing the renderings, Echo had spent 4 hours drawing up the designs. She wouldn't show them to anyone and had never cracked a smile the whole time she was working. Molech stomped toward a random car, an unoccupied one, grabbed it by the front end, and started swinging it around like a discus. He let it fly, and it crashed into the faux obsidian, leaving a massive scar where his own sculpted face had been. Scott stood by the truck and sighed. Zoey got her swollen jaw loose enough to ask, "Is the anatomy right? We had to guess." Without looking at her, Scott said, "You know why he's keeping you alive, right? And so he can take his time with you later. You know what Molech does in his spare time? He studies torture techniques, going back thousands of years. He's a walking encyclopedia on the subject. If you knew what was coming, you'd already be screaming." Andre appeared on the Skyline feed, bellowing a cartoon villain laugh. "As you can now see, my humble servant Molech has come to join me in our lavish headquarters. He appears to be throwing something of a tantrum, probably due to having too much Mexican." Molech walked up to the foundation and punched it, unleashing the full force of the plasma from his fist. The wall exploded, leaving a hole like a dump truck had crashed through it. A swarm of shirtless men were scrambling out of the building, Molech's own crew trying to get clear of it before their boss's tantrum brought it down on their heads. The Skyline feed blinked away to a reporter who was standing a block from the scene. Shouting over the chaos, she said, "As you can see behind me, a lone figure believed to be Molech himself has appeared and is destroying the tower. That's right, he is tearing away at his own headquarters, as if he has had a change of heart, a crisis of conscience, if you will. We're going to try to get an interview with him, this powerful story of redemption playing out before our very—" The noise of the collapsing tower filled the world. Zoey, now watching a skyscraper tumble into its own footprint for the second time in 3 days. Then she saw it again when Molech strode over and did the same to the Ice Palace. The reaction from the bystanders was a bizarre stew of cheers and screams of terror. Plaster dust hung in the air like a thick fog. Molech stomped back towards Scott and Zoey and said, "I hope that was worth it, bitch. Those buildings were junk, and Andre Knox is a pancake now." To Scott, he said, "Give me some good news, partner." "How about this? Approximately every remaining gun in Tabula Rasa is converging on this spot." This was relayed as if it was in fact good news. Almost on cue, Zoey heard the faint sound of approaching helicopters. Molech grinned, baring his teeth. "Ain't no man felt juice like this, Black Scott. It's God mode from here on out." The Skyline feed switched away from the fire and ice aftermath to the collection of ragtag armies approaching from all 4 directions. And then, abruptly, the feed cut to black, and then to a laughing Andre. Molech let out a long breath and closed his eyes. "You freaking people." Andre bellowed, "Aha! I see you have fallen for my trivial diversion. As you can see, I was not in the hollowed-out shell of a casino you thought was my headquarters, but am across town, in the toppled-over ruins of the once great Parkview Apartments. But you do not dare approach, for now I unveil the true centerpiece of our master plan. Tabula Rasa, behold what is behind me and tremble. We are in possession of a 10-megaton plasma fusion warhead, a weapon powerful enough to turn all this city into a vast wasteland of molten sand." Zoey heard screams and gasps from the bystanders gathered on the sidewalks, and from at least one of Molech's henchmen. On the screen, Andre stepped aside to reveal the bomb, an olive-green cone with a yellow tip, about 3 feet wide and 10 feet long. "We will detonate this device, vaporizing everything within a 50-mile radius, unless our demands are met within the next 60 minutes. What demands? Stay tuned to this feed and all will be revealed." The Skyline feed switched to a still image, a doctored photo depicting the costumed Andre and Molech standing back to back, giving a thumbs up to the camera. The words "fire and ice" were spelled out beneath their feet in flashy animated text. Molech rushed over and grabbed Zoey's face. "Hey, wake up! Have you ever been on fire, Piglet? Do you know what it feels like to have third-degree burns over your whole body? Do you know what it feels like to then lie on a dirty concrete floor in your own filth for weeks and months after your skin is burned away? Do you have any idea how long my doctors can keep you alive in that condition? I'm going to ask you exactly one time. Is the nuke real?" Zoey spat the blood out of her mouth so she could sputter the word. "Yes." "You're a lying gash scab. Why would you have a real nuke?" "Why would we have a fake one? We bought a machine to build Arthur's designs. That's what we made." "So what's your plan? Blow up the whole city? For what?" "To stop you from getting it." Scott said, "All the hired guns are diverting toward the Parkview site. Looks like every blink camera in the city is headed there too. So, what, we going?" The gears turned in Mullich's head. He tried to study Zoey's face. Yes. No. God damn it. That's what they want, isn't it? He grabbed Zoey again, squeezing her throat this time with metal fingers. Instantly, her air was gone. Tell me what you're planning. You think you know what I'm capable of? I promise you do not. He took his hand away long enough for her to scream, I don't know! This was the truth. She had pretty much lost track of the plan at this point. You want to know? Ask Will. Hey, good idea. Where is he now? Back at the house. He's controlling everything from there. Mullich studied Zoey's bloody face once more. Scott said what Mullich was surely thinking. This sure looks like an ambush, boss. What could they possibly ambush me with, Scott? Whatever it is, I'm kind of eager to see it. Screw it. Let's go.